my personal connection to those characters uh, deepened the writing a little bit and made it feel more authentic and sincere. And so I
Mhm.
wanted to continue that and write a book that was even closer to my life. I wanted to push that limit between realism and reality.
Welcome to our latest Book Reporter Talks to Interview, where our guest today is William Landay, and we are going to be talking about his newest novel, All That Is Mine I Carry With Me, which is a Book Reporter Bets on selection. And in our current poll, it's the #1 book that you are all looking forward to reading. So I am super excited about talking to Bill about this. Our reviewer, Kate Ayers, had this to say in her review. Landay cleverly lays out the trappings of a criminal case from several perspectives, leaving readers curious as to who knows what. The whole story is presented in a deliciously layered fashion. By the end, nothing is left to wonder. Well, maybe one little thing. So, welcome, Bill, with that introduction. It's so good to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So I can't believe it's, first of all, that's been a decade since you wrote a book, or since Defending Jacob came out. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. But let's start with you telling us about All Those Mine I Carry With Me. Tell us about the book and the plot, etc.
So this is a story that it's about a missing woman, and it opens with an 8-year-old girl in 1975 coming home from school one afternoon to find her house empty.
Mhm.
Her mother has vanished. There is no evidence of a crime, no sign of struggle. Nothing is out of place. Nothing is stolen. Uh, and the mystery of this woman's vanishing is the central mystery of the book.
Mhm.
Her husband is a criminal defense lawyer, a very clever guy, and in some ways an abrasive, unlikable
Mhm.
guy.
Mhm.
And because of these things, he immediately becomes the primary suspect, as you would expect the husband to be the suspect in any missing woman case. Um, and so these children are left with the weight of not only their mother's absence, but the suspicion that shrouds their father.
Mhm.
It's a mystery that's built around a case that goes unsolved for many, many years, which uh, defies the conventions of the genre a little bit, but
Mhm.
that's the point.
Mhm.
Uh, I resist being pigeonholed as a crime writer. I always think that I'm writing family stories or stories of general interest that happen to involve crime. And in this case, I wanted to address head on some of the doubt, some of the mystery that always goes on in real life crimes. I think
Mhm.
one of the false conventions of the genre is that these cases are ever solved.
Mhm.
Even when you get a guilty verdict, even when you get a confession, uh, there is an error rate and there is a shadow of doubt that surrounds even resolved cases.
Mhm.
Um, and I wanted to address that head on. There's a limit to what we can know as people. Other people are a mystery, and criminals, especially, are hard to know. So I think that's one thing that crime novels aren't so great about addressing, but
Mhm.
it's a fact of life.
It's facts of life, and and yes, it's like what you know and what you don't know, and what you knew in 1972 that you might be able to figure out now because there are ring cameras every place. And what could you
Yes.
now know? And it made it a lot harder. It's made it a lot harder to figure out, oh gee, well, who would not know what? So let's go back to the opening lines where the protagonist, we learned in a bit, is Philip Solomon, speaks in the first person about being empty, mentions struggling and even thinking dark thoughts. Were you summing up some of your own feelings as you came to write this book? Like, were you saying there, like, I haven't written in a really long time and I've got this page in front of me. What am I
Mhm.
going to do?
Well, to some extent, it's always a struggle for me. I find writing is always difficult. I don't find that even moving from book to book that it gets any easier for me. I've never found it to be the kind of job that you get better at it, of course, but it never gets easier for
Mm-mm.
some reason.
Mhm.
The Either your standards keep rising, or your I don't know what it is, but I'm never satisfied. I'm always afraid to write, and I'll only do it when I feel like I have no other choice. So to some extent, yes, that struggle is me and is familiar. But what Philip says about writing is true.
Mhm.
I don't really think in terms of writer's block. I don't. It just doesn't describe what's happening there. It's not that. It's not that there's some kind of neurosis that's preventing me from writing. It's that writing is hard.
Mhm.
And sometimes cracking the difficult problems that you run into takes time and
Mhm.
takes struggle. Philip Roth, who's one of my favorites, used to say that the struggle is part of the process.
Mhm.
And that philosophy has helped me a lot. I do feel like wrestling with these demons and working your way through these difficult problems tends to result in a better book.
Mhm.
Um, you make choices that are inventive and that surprise the reader. And as a reader myself, that's the kind of book uh, that delights me,
Mhm.
that I find interesting. I don't like books where I can see what's coming next.
Mhm.
Uh, and so, as a writer, you want to recreate that experience for your own readers. And
Mhm.
so, it takes 10 years because sometimes it takes 10 years. Maybe the next book will be easier and I'll bang it out in 6 months, but that tends not to be my way.
No, no, it's not. And it's, but by the same token, the book delivers. And I think that that's the most important thing that people really want to think about at this point. Sometimes people are doing a book a year. A lot of the books that were written during the pandemic, especially, I thought were not that strong. And it's because you knew that people were dealing with other things. And there was a whole raft of books that I don't think were the writer's best. And they've written since then much better.
Yeah.
And, but there's that do this, do this, do this, get out on this timing, etc.
Hmm.
So every
Yeah, and
port
I,
has
I
some.
I want to avoid that because I do
Mhm.
feel like that's a pressure that we should never put our writers under. I feel like if you have a writer that you love, it's like having a band that you love or a movie
Mhm.
director, a movie actor. When you get the band's new record or you see
Mhm.
the new movie or whatever it is, you're trusting that person, that brand to deliver for you.
Mhm.
And, to me as a reader, I don't care if Ian McEwan is one of my favorites.
Mhm.
I don't care if he's produced a book a year or if I wait 2 years or 3 years. When the book comes out, I'll read it. But when I see his name on the cover, I know that I'm going to get a certain level of quality and care and thought. And that's
Mhm.
all I care about. And it's the
Mhm.
same with the band. I've been
Uh-huh.
following Bruce Springsteen for 40 years, 50 years now. I'll see if he wants to keep me waiting 5 years for the next one. That's
You'll do
fine.
it.
Yeah.
So you're going to go see him in concert? Did you get tickets?
Yeah, he's actually coming to Boston next week, and I didn't get tickets for that one, so I'm going in the summer he's doing a football stadium tour in the summer, so I'll go
I
to see him
love
then.
it. I
I saw
love
him
it.
in '83, and I'm going to see him in 2023, so
Oh, I love it.
40 years apart.
Yeah, I'm the big Paul Simon fan. So I'm for the first
You're
time
a
in
Jersey girl
Jersey.
who's not a Springsteen fan?
Somewhat,
Where
but
did you go
more.
wrong?
Yeah, I know. It's like me. I guess I was originally from Queens and I don't know it. But no, definitely Paul Simon since 1970, though. It's been
Mhm,
like, that long. And I remember being in seventh grade and then playing a song, playing Sound of Silence, and I just couldn't
mhm.
understand what's Sound of Silence. And I think it's the same kind of thing, though. When he delivers something, it's quality. Like when he
Exactly.
delivered, he takes a very long time in between albums. He's not touring anymore. There's rumor that he's working on something. And he did
Mhm,
this actually brilliant piece last year. And he did an interview, and I'm spacing who he did the interview with, and it was it was an audio original. Malcolm Gladwell. He did it with Malcolm
mhm.
Gladwell, and he talked about his songs and deconstructed what he'd done. And this band, those are the moments that you really feel like you're getting inside somebody's head, and you're
Yes,
seeing they didn't just throw it out there. There was something behind what they did,
right.
and
And
I
that
mean,
long connection that you feel with someone like Paul Simon, or you must have
Bruce
favorite
Springsteen.
writers that you've
Yeah,
been
yeah,
following for
yep.
a very long time as well, it becomes a personal connection. It's a level of trust.
Hmm.
And that's what I think is important.
Hmm.
I want my readers to trust me. Uh,
Hmm.
and and that's the highest reward you can have is readers who believe in you.
Yeah.
And so that's, that's the reward for all this.
That's the game. That's the game, is figuring out what to do this. So every book's got something that's a springboard to get it started. Something that this is where the idea is going to come from. What was it for this book?
Well, in some ways, it was the anti-springboard, and the anti-springboard was it wasn't going to be defending Jacob too. I
Right.
knew that.
Exactly. Yeah.
One thing that I've always thought is I want each book to be a challenge, and I want to constantly get better and constantly raise the bar. And the one thing that I didn't want is to get conservative. I didn't want to play it safe in order to protect my gains.
Hmm.
Uh, so defending Jacob in a way was a turn for me. The books that preceded it were I don't want to say they were stereotypical crime novels, but they were typical in some in the sense that they involve street crime.
Hmm.
And with defending Jacob, the goal or one of the goals was to write a book that felt more personal to me and where I was closer to the surface.
Hmm.
So it involves a prosecutor and a family whose life parallels my own in a lot of ways. And so in this book, I wanted to continue that because I felt like my personal connection to those characters uh, deepened the writing a little bit and made it feel more authentic and sincere. And so I
Hmm.
wanted to continue that and write a book that was even closer to my life. I wanted to push that limit between realism and reality.
Hmm.
And so when the book opens with a writer whose life parallels my own in some ways, and whose long silence parallels my own in some ways, in part, what I'm doing there is leaning into that personal investment in
Hmm.
these books. Um, I wanted readers to feel my presence there. Orwell says there's a famous uh, essay that Orwell wrote about Dickens where he says that with great writers, you feel the sense of their face behind the page.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
wanted readers to feel that too. I want them to feel my presence in that story, and I think that well, I shouldn't say I think it. I hope
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that that's the effect.
That's the effect of what ends up happening. Our reviewer, Kate, asked if this book is based loosely or otherwise on any case you came across in your years of prosecution. Anything with missing
Uh-huh.
person or.
Well, I wouldn't get into where the exact line is between fact and fiction here because I think that uh, one of the points of this book, one of the reasons the book works is that it feels different. It feels a little too real, a little too close to life. And I don't want to rob it of that. I think there's a little chill that you get when it starts to brush up against reality that way.
Mhm.
And I don't want to intrude on the reader's experience by saying this happened, this didn't happen. So what I will say though is that I try never to draw directly on real cases.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, I and this is mentioned in the book as well. Um, I do believe that families and victims of crimes never volunteer to be in the public eye, and I feel that it's a little uh, unfair and unkind to take their stories and turn them into the sort of uh, fantasies that we sell. Um, so I try to stay away from that. On the other hand, we live in the world. You can't help
Mhm.
being influenced by what's happening. And missing woman cases are unfortunately common. They're more common than we like to think.
Mhm.
Uh, so there's no shortage of this sort of case,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Well, it's interesting. I was watching a piece last night on, or documentary, I think it was 4 parts on Netflix last night, called The Killing Fields, of what's happened of these missing women in Texas. And they've all been in this one area. And it was fascinating to see how long you're exactly talking about. These people were gone. And I was thinking of your book as I was watching it, because this was decades of the girl didn't come home. She was at the phone booth. Oh, somebody picked her up in a bar. And there were clusters. They were all buried in this one area. And what was happening? I watched Murder in Bighorn on Showtime, and it was really interesting because they're talking about the indigenous women that are all along this one highway, and it's going up to Canada, and what's happening, that these people are going missing. And are we ever going to find them again? And you watch the families with that sense of, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. And I
Right.
feel like watching those, I feel like it was captured in the book of the anxiety that constantly pervades of,
Right.
is she coming home? Where'd she go? And
And in some ways, the not knowing is worse than the tragedy.
it's
You
exactly.
know, the if you had found that she had been murdered, as most often these women are, um, and you can at least begin to work on grieving and moving on. If you
Mhm.
don't know, if it's just an unresolved case that lingers for decades, that's its own kind of torture, and I I, I can't even imagine the stress. Or I guess I can imagine it because I did.
You did it. You did it. You did it very, very well. And we'll just stay on this other killing thing for just 1 second. But they actually created models of two of these people, and they were in their 20s and 30s, and they had been missing, and their families didn't even have a clue that they might be down there. And it was it was just a really interesting, after reading this book and after thinking about people being missing for a long period of time. It
Mhm.
was what we can do now with reconstruction of bones that are found, things that they can figure out that we
Yeah.
didn't have, the forensics, that's the word, Carol, that you didn't have. Back to your book, though, we meet Jeff, one of the siblings, first, and he's described as being a prince in high school. What makes him a prince in high school? I love that. It's like a prince
Uh,
in high school,
he's a prince in the sense that Philip goes to a very strict and traditional old school sort of prep school in Boston, and he feels Philip feels like a bit of an intruder. This is our narrator. His friend Jeff, who's the son of this missing woman, um, his older brother goes there and he's had several family members go there, so he feels entitled to his place at this school,
Mhm.
uh, whereas our narrator Phil feels like a an interloper, a newcomer, an arriviste.
Yeah, that's exactly. Very close to the beginning, when Philip meets with Miranda, he sees a tattoo on her that reads Omnia mecum porto. It's my it's my badly just said Latin. All that is mine, I carry with me. Was that always the working title? Like, did that happen early, or did that come later to have that be, no, the tattoo
You
that's
mean,
on her
as a
arm?
title?
Yes. As it
No,
as
the title, I have such trouble with titles. And that came very late as a title. I always struggle to come to the right title. And this one, because it's so long,
Mhm.
um, I wasn't sure of. I kind of like the awkwardness of it now. I think it makes the title sticky and memorable. And I also like I love that line.
Mhm.
And so the detail was always there in the book, right from the start.
Mhm.
Uh, but it didn't become the title until very late in the process. In fact, I noticed the detail comes from there was a young woman who worked at the coffee shop I used to go to who had that tattoo on
Wow.
her arm exactly like that. And so I'm always hoping that somewhere I haven't seen this woman in years, but we talked about it at the counter one day as I was getting my coffee, and she should have known she was talking to a writer. Anything is fair game. But I imagine somewhere out there, there's a woman with this tattoo on her arm who's going to read this book and think, "Wait a minute,
Wait a minute. Wait. A title,
that's
a
too big a
tattoo.
coincidence."
No, and it was great because he said it's kind of like worn because it's been there for a while. It's,
Yeah,
it's not fresh tattoo. It's been there for a while.
right. And
Um,
it's not written to display. It's not a show-offy kind of tattoo. It's written
mhm,
on the underside of her arm
mhm,
where it's actually very hard for her to show it to other people. It's meant for her to look down and read it and be reminded of this philosophy of self-reliance and not being caught up in other people's anxieties and opinions and pressures. And this is something that for Miranda is a difficult thing. She is an emotional person, and she has troubles with depression and self-regulation. And so for her, it's always a struggle to live up to this ideal, um, to know that what she carries within herself is enough
mhm,
and that she can be the captain of her own emotions.
mhm,
This is something that she will struggle with over the course of her lifetime. And it's especially cruel that her mother's vanishing happens to a fragile person like her.
Mhm,
She
mhm.
just isn't uh, built for this kind of tragedy. And so, this is the payoff of these kind of stories is you can take characters like this who are interesting and thoughtful in their own ways and put them under pressure, put
Mhm,
them under stress and see what happens.
mhm.
And so that's, she's an interesting character to place in the middle of this story.
And she goes and tries to invent another family for herself as well. She tries to make another mom. She tries to make siblings. She tries to make something. It's mostly the mom, and I'm not going to give too much away, and I promise I won't do that. But it's just she just tries to do something to invent the security that she feels that she needs, and she's
Yes.
not secure in herself, so she's got to be secure with another unit, and especially it's got to be a woman. It can't be another man.
She so wants to be part of a family. She
Hmm.
so misses what she's lost, which is a mother, an intact family, a home.
Hmm.
And you can tell even on the day that she comes home and finds her mother missing, that the warmth has gone out of her house, even that she
Hmm.
doesn't it doesn't feel like home anymore. And this isn't giving anything away either, but as she's wandering around the empty house, one of her immediate thoughts is that it's just a building now. Uh,
Hmm.
the Larkin family will pass through it. Other people, other families have lived there before hers. Other families will live there after, and that it's not her unique home anymore.
Hmm.
And that sense of our own transience and our own vulnerability is something that, as kids especially, we don't like to think about. As we grow up and get older, we have an easier time accepting the reality of it. But for a kid like Miranda, who's really, she's a little kid when this happens,
Hmm.
it's very, very difficult. And so she does go out into the world uh, looking for ways to fill that hole.
Hmm. She's got her 3 Oreos, but now after she has her 3 Oreos and a glass of milk, and maybe she's not supposed to have 3, she's only supposed to have 2. But after that, she doesn't want that freedom. She doesn't want the freedom. She wants somebody to be there to take care of her, to do certain
Mhm.
rituals with her as life goes on and things like that. And the
Right.
adopting of somebody else is not really what's going to end up working. So then we get to hear from Jane, the woman who's deceased. And why do we get to hear from Jane? Because Jane gives us a lot of info.
Jane does give us a lot of info. It's I knew going into this that we were going to jump around in time, that it was going to be a fragmented sort of storytelling, uh, and that we were going to jump around in point of view as well. And I don't want to give too much away about this because part of the reading experience is the joy of these jolts, of these
Mhm.
jumps.
Mhm.
Uh, but it's hard to talk about the book without talking about the book. So, um, a lot of those decisions about who would be narrating the different sections and when they would occur and how much time could be elided in jumping from one segment to another was really about solving problems. You're trying to tell this story in a way that's interesting and inventive and unexpected, and you tend to write yourself into corners. If you're going to write from the perspective of first person narrators, you're necessarily limiting the knowledge of each. You're limiting
Mhm.
uh, your ability to do exposition. Um, so you're looking for ways out of that, and you're looking for ways to jolt and surprise the reader.
Mhm.
Uh, and this is, I mentioned Ian McEwan earlier. One of my favorites is Atonement, which is a book that is told in a similar uh, fragmented way, and it's like a puzzle for the reader to put together. And I think that there is a kind of delight as a reader in being engaged that way and being involved in assembling the story for yourself that way. There's a moment at the end of Atonement where the pieces kind of click into place, and it's just electric when you get there. I think that all good books, all books that kind of come off the page and you have these vivid reading experiences. Some books are flat; it doesn't always work, but
Mhm.
when it works, it's this uh, dialogue between you and the writer. It's something that the reader has to actively participate in creating the story for herself.
Hmm.
And I want to invite readers to play their part and to make connections. And so there's a lot of links that could have been drawn. I could have spelled out every connection, every clue, every
Hmm.
whatever, and left very little work for the reader to do. But I think that readers like to be engaged, and I think
Hmm.
uh, they need to make those leaps for themselves sometimes, especially now. I feel like there's so much content out there. We're all just pelted with
Hmm.
pinging phones and tweets and updates all day long. There's so much stuff coming at us. We're used to getting information in a fragmentary kind of way, and we're used to making links ourselves and making inferences ourselves. And we're also used to writing off a lot of this as just noise and not paying
Hmm.
attention and tuning things out. And so I wanted to invite the reader to do something similar in this case. Receive these fragments of information and make your own connections. See how something in book one is picked up in book two,
Hmm.
uh, and I think that for the reader, it's an exercise that's going to feel very true to this moment
Hmm.
that we are all living in. Which, by the way, I think is a hard time for novelists and for novel readers
Hmm.
alike, because we are trained to skim, to surf. Um, we flick up and down our phones and we read little tweets and we just can't seem to maintain the sort of focus that for our parents and grandparents might have come a lot more naturally. I often
Hmm.
think of someone
Yeah.
like Dickens or Melville writing Moby Dick, where he'll go off for 50 pages about the color white or about how you dissect a whale. And I just think, oh my goodness, you couldn't write this way now. Nobody's going to read that.
No.
But when he was writing, most of his readers were at home
Hmm.
without electricity, with no radio, no music, no TV, no internet. What else were they going to do? They would follow Melville for 50 pages and read about that just because it's interesting. Now it's a lot to ask readers uh, to maintain the kind of long-term,
Hmm.
intense focus that novel reading requires. And so one thing I wanted to do with this book was to meet today's readers where they are living in this crazy environment that we live in. I know that when people are reading my book, their phone will be pinging right next to them. I know some of them will be reading on their phone, on the Kindle app, and they'll be 2 clicks away from, the Yankees score or the weather or whatever is happening in Washington.
Hmm.
And so I think one way to defeat that is to present them with the sort of story that the world presents them with, which is fragmentary and incomplete and developing before your eyes, and invite them to make their own connections. I feel like that is the way we live now, and it's the way we read now.
Hmm.
And that is unfortunately our experience. I wouldn't want to go back to the 19th century for too many reasons. Life is better now in almost every way,
Right.
but it would be kind of nice to go off to a log cabin somewhere and read Moby Dick without my phone pinging at me all day.
Yeah. It's just that thing all day long. Bing. You have to, like, what do you have to do? Like, I have something binging right now that it's not happening in a second, but it happens. And I'm like, it's not a message. What is this? Like, what alert can I turn off now? Figure that
Right.
out tonight. So Jane has this line where the subject comes up before they're married about money. And she says he's rich. And he responds, no, my parents are. And she says that she did not understand the distinction, but perhaps she should have. And she goes on and on to say that she should have listened harder. Let's talk about that, as money is often the catalyst in a marriage breaking down. And for her, this money thing is out there. And I'll just to play it through. It's the money is inherited. The family's laid out by Dan's mom. Money's for the spouse and his wife until they die. No money goes to you. And the same happens for future generations. That's the way the trust or whatever it is set up. And this is for clarity for Jane, like she's dating this guy, and his mother like drags her in the bedroom and says, look, I need to have this conversation about you. But it's not about the money always, is it? It's not always about the money, but the money does play into it.
Yeah, and it's an issue. Money is always an issue for everyone, and it often seems to be an issue in these missing women cases, and in ordinary divorces, any kind of split up. It's
Hmm.
just hard for couples to get around this, especially when there's a lot of money at stake.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, Dan Larkin comes from a wealthy family, but the family uses money as a form of control in
Hmm.
some ways.
Hmm.
And that creates pressure on Dan, who's used to living an expensive lifestyle,
Hmm.
but doesn't necessarily have the funds to pull it off.
Hmm.
People assume he's rich because he's from a wealthy family, but he doesn't have access to that money necessarily. And his own parents are a little controlling about it.
Hmm.
So it's a source of friction in their marriage, and it's a source of friction just in terms of their background and temperament, because Jane comes from a family that doesn't have money,
Hmm.
and she's taught that money isn't important and that money certainly can't buy happiness, which is true.
Hmm.
Uh, so it's something that this married couple has to negotiate. And I don't know that Jane ever really gets to an understanding of how Dan feels about it.
Hmm.
Dan is mysterious in a lot of ways, certainly to his wife.
Hmm.
And that is, that's true of a lot of people's experience as well. We don't understand people all that well necessarily, and that's just the human condition. In some ways, defending Jacob was about parents looking down the family tree at their children and trying to understand them. This is about, children looking up the family tree at their parents and trying to understand them, and Jane looking across at her husband and
Hmm.
trying to understand him.
Hmm.
And the mystery of what's going on in Dan Larkin's head is what drives the book,
It is a
really.
try the book, yeah. Especially when she finds that he's doing something, I'm not going to give it away, and it's something that she completely planned. And she's like, "Oh, isn't that kind of interesting of what's going on? I'm watching that unfold before me that I planned." And
Yeah,
and
yeah,
but getting inside her head, we understand him a lot more, even though we can't understand him completely from her. We can
right.
understand him more because she's sharing what she's seen about him, the way he tips extravagantly, the way he throws money here, there, the other place. And for him, money's power.
Yeah,
Money's going to get you the table you want, the this you want, that you want. And she's like, we're going to go broke as you're sitting there, like, throwing this money around, and
yeah.
makes
Well,
her a
remember,
problem.
she comes from a family where you really could go broke. In his
Yes.
mind, it going broke just isn't something he's ever really lost too much sleep over. So
Yes.
it's a constant source of friction between them. But this is what's interesting. If this is a book that covers a very long time span,
Hmm.
and so you get to watch Dan uh, grow from a high school kid all the way to an old man, to the
Hmm.
very end of his life. And these issues play out over a very long period in very interesting ways.
Hmm.
And in some ways, the things that we think about and worry about as teenagers do trail us all through life. We all have our little quirks and obsessions. And I don't know if Dan himself ever really gets to grips with money. He wants to be a player. Likes to dress and drive fancy cars and do all of it with a certain style. And that need to fund that lifestyle uh, shapes him.
Hmm. It
And
is.
we don't know uh, to what extent it may or may not have provided a motive for this crime. Uh, but it's there. It's there as a possible motive, and that is part of the mystery.
Hmm. It's part of like what's out there. How did this happen? There's a detective that can't get this case out of his mind. It's years, and he still wants to crack this one. And I've seen this often, that somebody says that there's a case that keeps me up at night. This is it. There are any cases that you worked on that you're practicing that you still think about, of like either the outcome, should it have happened like that? Did
Sure.
it happen like that? It stays with you, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, definitely, especially victim cases, because you feel an obligation to the victim to put things right to the extent that things can be put right.
Right.
Uh, and a murder case is a special kind of victim case because the victim can't be known.
Mm.
And what's interesting to me is that in homicide cases, there's almost more of an allegiance to these victims who, by definition, can't be known,
Mhm.
and yet it feels like a personal debt. So yeah, I think that the Detective Glover's experience and his response to this case uh, is not as unusual as we might think.
Mhm.
With there's such a long tradition of tough guy noir detectives that we kind of presume that that's how they must be. That's
Yeah.
how all detectives
Yeah.
must be. And of course,
Everybody's Bosch.
there are tough
Everybody.
guys. There are hard guys out there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But there are just as many who are doing this, precisely because it's coming from their heart, and they're personally, emotionally invested in these cases, and those are the best cops because they will hustle, they will go the extra mile, they'll do anything to make sure the case comes out right.
And make sure it all works,
Yeah,
there's a jolt to the family when the person's gone, because then they need the answers. And then the body's found. And when Jane's found, it's like people think there's closure, but then it opens up more questions. It's like new questions emerge just because she's there. And then the sides get taken again. Because before it's like gone, oh, what happened? Now it's like, wait a second, gone. How were you involved? How were you involved? Did you know anything? And it becomes either the family pointing questions and then everybody on the outside saying, why? How did it happen? Where do you go? So you open up something as soon as the body gets found. And it's on the jacket of the book. It's not like I'm giving something away.
yeah,
And then the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
family divides over, what are we going to do? And do they divide? I think it's the interesting question for the reader is, do they divide the way you think they would divide? Or do you think different people would align with each other? You know?
Right, and we assume that families will react in a uniform way.
Mhm.
And yet we all know that even in the same family, there are very different personalities. You can take any ordinary Thanksgiving dinner and you'll find all kinds of people sitting around the table, even though
Mhm.
they come from almost identical backgrounds. Um, and so I think that the way the Larkin family splits on this case uh, feels right to me. There's always frictions within families, and again, this is a family that is pushed to the utmost. It's hard enough to get through Thanksgiving dinner. Imagine being pushed to this extreme. And these are what we're really talking about here is the three Larkin kids, all of whom have different temperaments. Of the three, there's three kids. There's Alex, who's the oldest, who's kind of conservative, uh, who who almost can't entertain the thought that his father might have done this, and 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 can't feels that it would be a betrayal to even suspect his father, to even question his father. Uh, and there's his younger brother Jeff, who's the middle child, perhaps as a middle child as I am, uh, uh, finds it very natural to think in unorthodox ways and to question everything. Um, and so Jeff and Alex in particular have butt heads about this,
Mhm.
as brothers often do. And it's a question of temperament and personality, and not just about the state of the evidence, because they're both working from a common set of facts, and they're both being reasonable, intelligent, well-meaning, and they're simply drawing different conclusions from the evidence that's available to them. And there's simply no way for either of them to know that they're right and the other is wrong.
Mhm.
And and so there's no way for them to move past it. Um, it's just an impossible situation, and I wouldn't say it tears the family apart, but it torments them.
Mhm.
Uh, they can't be torn apart because they remain siblings. They simply don't have the option of walking away, and that is Uh, that's how families work. You don't get to opt out of a family.
Like a
You can
tear.
go away if you like, but your last name is your last name.
It's a tear. There's still a piece of paper, but there's a tear in it. And the tear is which
Exactly.
side are you on? You do something really interesting with long strings of back and forth dialogue with just words, with no descriptions attached to them. He said, she said, whatever. Why that? Why did you do that in one section of the book?
Well, part of it is I just love that kind of storytelling. As a reader, I love it. It feels very Elmore Leonard to me. I love uh, the art, the skill of uh, storytelling through dialogue, of pushing information out in a way that feels effortless and incidental to what's going on. But the story is moving as you're reading
Mhm,
those
mhm.
conversations, and I love that. The other piece of it is this is the one way to think of this novel is a suite of four novellas, and I wanted each of these books to have its own feel, its own grammar, its own sound, its own syntax. And so these are four different voices. I wanted it to feel almost like four different writers. Um, one of the experiences that I had with defending Jacob, which I didn't know going in, was there were transcript sections in that book that were reproductions of what grand jury transcripts essentially look like, and those were in a different font from the rest of the book. And so, in the first time I introduced it, there was a little bit about, this is a grand jury transcript in such and such a case, and then it looked like a typeface. I didn't know that ebook readers can't reproduce multiple fonts like that.
Right.
So in the printed book, the reader gets the experience that I intended, which is that you learn after the first few encounters with this, oh, now we're back in the grand jury. And just by presenting that format, I wouldn't have to introduce anything. I wouldn't have to reorient the reader. She would automatically know. So coming into this book, I wanted to be able to reorient the reader constantly as well, but this time I had to do it only in ways that didn't involve the visual presentation of
Mhm,
it. It had to be
mhm,
purely a matter of writing style.
mhm.
Uh, and so in this case, I wanted to make sure, without resorting to visual tricks like that, to book design, that you knew the minute you started hearing this new voice that this was a new voice. This was a
Mhm.
different person. This just, you know, didn't sound like the previous narrator. With the audiobook, in this case,
Mhm.
way I insisted that there be four different readers
Right.
because there are four different voices, and in a way, that's an advantage that the audiobook has over the written book here.
Right.
You can actually hear the different voices, but for the written book, that's something that the reader has to uh, imagine. And so I really wanted these books to be able to stand alone as novellas. And in some ways, I think you could reshuffle books 1 through 4. You
Mhm,
could read them 3, 1, 4, 2, and whatever,
mhm,
and you still have a coherent story.
mhm.
Um, or you could print only book 1 or book 4, read them in isolation, and you would have a completed unit.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I love the idea of these fragmentary stories, and I love the idea that when you get to the end, you feel like you've had these multiple experiences. One of the great things about books is that because, and what we talked about earlier, because the reader has to pick the words up off the page and perform them for herself, it's this intimate way of experiencing a story. You read it in your own mind, and with a first person narrator, especially, you are internally experience a story in your mind, but from the perspective of another person.
Mhm,
You are learning to see the world through another person's eyes. You're learning literally to empathize,
mhm,
and that is that's the foundation of morality. That's you can't be cruel to another person if you can imagine what it is like to be that person.
mhm.
So I feel that this is such an important skill for all of us to have and to practice, to get our reps in and get stronger with. And so this book is really just an extreme form of that. What you get here is four different chances to slip on the mask of another person and to start seeing the world as they see it. You know, it's one thing to see Jeff Larkin uh, making his father crazy or doubting his father or self-destructing in various ways as he tends to do. Uh, it's another thing to slip into the mind of Jeff in
Mhm.
the middle of the story, or to slip out of the mind afterward, and to see what it's like to really walk through a story like this. So the idea of switching perspectives like that is immersive and good for you, I think.
Yeah.
And
Well,
the other
it's
thing is I didn't want to do what you often see is books that will switch perspective chapter by chapter,
yes.
and they jump back and forth from one point of view to another, one narrator to another. And I always find that disruptive. It's
Mhm.
it's much more immersive, I think, to jump into a character's perspective and stay there, live in it for a while, really walk around in the world for an extended period, seeing the world through their eyes and hearing their voice. I always find that the chapter by chapter thing, just when you're getting used to someone's voice, you're jumping to another and you're
Mhm.
constantly jumping back and forth. And it tends to be more of a superficial experience because you're just constantly being jogged out of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, I wanted it to be chunks like that. I wanted it to be deep. I wanted it to be thick, a thick experience.
And it's interesting because for the audiobook, it's so much easier to do dialogue going back and forth instead of so he said, da da da, she said, blah 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 blah, going back and forth. And you're so I always think about the audio because audio has become so important. And think about the poor reader who's saying they're reading. She said
I've
with a
listened to it.
smile.
It's
She
a
said,
very hard book for the audiobook readers to do because you're doing dialogue. Really, they have no choice because there's so little he said, she said. They have to do it in voices. And
yes.
so you see them, but not only are they imitating the voices in the dialogue, it's told through a first person narrator. So they've already assumed the voice, the narrator's voice. And so what they're imitating is the narrator imitating the voices of the speakers.
Hmm.
It's incredibly demanding. I often thought that because the Philip Solomon, the narrator of the first book, obviously is an avatar of my own, that it'd be interesting for me to be the reader of book one of the audiobook, just to sort of add another meta level to this whole thing. But then I saw what it was, and I just thought, that's crazy. You need a professional actor to do this. There's no way I could have pulled it off.
I didn't realize I swallow. I don't realize all the things I do with my mouth until then,
It's very book reading is such a hard thing. That is a real skill that these people have.
And many people are now reading their books aloud
Yeah,
because they realize the audio experience and you see that you repeat a word, you see this, that, the other thing that you don't see when you're looking at the page and says, how did I say that many times?
yes. Well, the other
So
thing is you know, novels aren't written to be read aloud.
mm-mm,
They're written to be heard in your head.
mhm,
And they can't be rewritten for the audiobook. I can't if I were writing a script to be read aloud like a radio show, I would script it differently. I would script something that sounds good when read by an actor.
mhm.
Uh, I don't take into account very long sentences and the need to breathe and different intonations and all that stuff. A dramatist would write very differently from a novelist,
Yeah.
and it makes such a difference to the audiobook experience that whether you have a good reader or a bad one. Um, and as we've discussed, audiobooks are becoming so important now that it's something that you really have to think about.
Well, I must pick the right narrators in order to tell my story well. It's in order to
Yes,
be present it well. It's true.
yes.
But then by book three, even the quotation marks disappear for the rest of the book. I mean, those are off the page. Okay. I did read this book carefully and I'm like, wait a second now. Now we've abandoned the quotation
Yeah,
marks too. Where are we
English
going
teachers are
with
going to
this?
have a fun time with this one.
Yeah, the proofreaders are going to be putting all this back in and you're going to be yanking them back out because no, that's not what happens here.
The
And
proofreaders would give me long notes about this is intended. Don't add quotation marks as you go through these page after page of dialogue.
But it was really interesting because a number of readers have come to this event that we do every month called Bookaccino Live, which is our second Wednesday of the month where we preview books. And a lot of times they'll say to me, they'll ask me a question, and it'll be, why are there no quotation marks in some books? Or there's no he said, she said. And why does people do this? And what you're doing is you're saying, I'm giving you a different perspective. And I can share that next month with them as an answer because it's something that deliberate that happens. I know Elizabeth Brundage has done it before. I know that there are, like authors that's like a signature of something that they do.
Right.
But is it really that you then can pull your own perspective of, is he mad? Is he this? Is he that? He said loudly or quietly or whatever. You just get in your head, you figure it out.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think there's also, and again, this is reader dependent too. A lot of different readers will experience this differently. Uh, they'll like it or not like it. But one thing that it might achieve for some readers, hopefully, is that it presents a very open page, a very simple page, and you slip through it in kind of a frictionless way. You stop noticing the quirky syntax, and you just focus more on the words. Especially if you have a Elmore Leonardy kind of page where it's a lot of short sentences, which is true to natural conversation, you just don't need to clutter up that page with a million quotation marks, which is more for the reader's eye to bump along as they're going from line to line. If you present it in a stripped way, you're inviting the reader to move down the page more quickly in a more fluid and smooth and frictionless way, and experience the conversation in a more natural rhythm than you might otherwise. That's the intention anyway. Whether it works or not, I think for some readers it will. I think some readers will think it's an affectation, and they'll find it pretentious or just odd.
If you're listening, I don't know why, why it was done. This reason, but I picked up on it, and I said I kept making notes, or not. I fold down pages. This is really bad. It's the reason I read galleys. Fold down pages, and I actually don't write like underline. And I come back to that page later and say, why did I say something on this page? Because my answer may have come later in the book. Like sometimes I can unfold that. I see why that question was there, but it's gone. But these I saw, oh, wait, this changed. Oh, wait, this changed. And it did give me a signal of, it's not just missing off the page because the copywriter or proofreader forgot to do it. There's some intent. And to understand the intent, I think makes really, interesting for readers. So was it always 4 parts? Did you always see this as 4 parts, or Carol, seriously, I was writing as I went.
No, I think it was originally 3 parts and a very brief epilogue to kind of tie it together. One thing that fell away from the book that was a part of it originally was who's really writing this. You have all these different speakers, but can we presume that that the name on the front of the book is the true author? And again, that's true to Atonement as an inspiration for this book. And so that kind of fell away, and I felt like that was one wrinkle too many, and it was one sort of meta game too many. It was a little too cute, and that freed up that 4th section to be more than just about the authorship of the book. It was more about the story itself. I did feel like, this is a book about an unsolved crime. And the problem with an open-ended story like that is that it's dramatically unsatisfying if you never reach any sort of closure. I do feel as a reader that when you've had a complete satisfying experience of a book, it's because you've reached some kind of resolution at the end. I understand books that are left without a true ending, but I don't personally enjoy that experience as much, especially a book like this. So that meant, coming to some sort of meaningful conclusion meant building out that 4th book to be more than I originally intended. And again, you have to find a way to do that to resolve the case in a way that's satisfying to the reader without betraying everything that came before, which
Mm,
is, a book about the weight of doubt, the weight of not knowing, the weight of mystery. And,
mhm,
to resolve the mystery is to take a lot of the magic out of the experience of the book, what drove the book for so long, and isn't true to life either. I mean, a lot of these cases, even if they go all the way to a guilty verdict,